February 1945, Iwo Jima. The sand is black and volcanic, soft underfoot, swallowing boots with every step. Smoke hangs low, pressed down by the wind coming off the Pacific. The air smells of sulfur, cordite, and burning fuel. Somewhere ahead, a bunker fires again, short, controlled, bursts from a slit barely wider than a man's hand. A U.S. Marine moves forward anyway. On his back is a weapon never meant for hesitation. Nearly 70 pounds of steel, fuel, and pressure. In his hands, a nozzle connected by hose and valves. Behind him, another Marine stays close, guarding the tank, watching for snipers, knowing that one bullet could turn both of them into fire. The Japanese defenders cannot see them clearly. The bunkers are layered, reinforced, hidden beneath rock and concrete. They were built to survive naval bombardment. They were built to kill infantry. But this weapon was designed for places shells could not reach. In less than half an hour, 16 bunkers will fall silent. Not because the defenders lacked courage, not because the terrain failed them, but because modern war had found a way inside the earth itself. To understand how this moment became possible, we must step back into the strategy, doctrine, and desperation that shaped the Pacific War. By early 1945, the Pacific War had become a war of distances measured in blood and time. The United States and Imperial Japan were no longer maneuvering across open seas alone. They were colliding island by island, each one a sealed battlefield where retreat was impossible and surrender was rare. The Japanese Empire had begun the war with speed and shock. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Singapore, Wake Island. In less than 6 months, Japanese forces had carved out a defensive perimeter stretching thousands of miles across the Pacific. But by 1943, that perimeter was shrinking. American industrial output had turned the tide. New ships crossed the ocean in waves. Air power followed, and with it came a strategy that would define the remainder of the conflict. Island hopping. Rather than assault every Japanese-held position, U.S. planners selected key islands that could support airfields and naval bases. Each capture pushed American bombers closer to Japan itself. Each assault also revealed a brutal truth. The Japanese military had adapted. Early in the war, Japanese defenders often attempted to repel landings at the shoreline. Those efforts failed under overwhelming naval gunfire and air bombardment. Lessons were learned quickly. By 1944, Japanese doctrine shifted toward defense in depth. Instead of dying on the beaches, they would let the Americans land, advance, and then be destroyed from hidden positions inland. But the battlefield moved underground. On islands like Saipan and later Iwo Jima, Japanese engineers carved fortresses into volcanic rock. Natural caves were expanded into firing positions. Concrete bunkers were reinforced with steel rails, timber, and earth. Tunnels connected strongpoints so that defenders could move unseen, resupply under fire, and reoccupy positions thought to be cleared. These were not static defenses. They were living systems. Machine guns were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. Mortar crews operated from concealed shafts. Riflemen fired from narrow embrasures that minimized exposure while maximizing lethality. When American artillery struck one bunker, the crew often survived, only to re-emerge hours later. Naval bombardment, once decisive, lost much of its effectiveness. Battleships could flatten surface structures, but they could not collapse an entire underground network. Bombs shook the ground. They rarely killed the men beneath it. By the time American infantry moved forward, the defenders were still there, and they were waiting. This reality forced a shift in U.S. tactics. Standard rifle fire could suppress but not destroy. A reinforced bunker. Grenades could be thrown, but often failed to penetrate deeply enough. Satchel charges required close contact, exposing engineers to lethal fire. Every bunker became a miniature siege. Casualty rates climbed. Platoons stalled. Entire companies were pinned down by a single firing slit cut into stone. Commanders needed a weapon that could reach into spaces that bullets and shells could not. They found it on fire. Flamethrowers were not new. They had been used in World War I and reintroduced in limited roles early in World War II. But in the Pacific, they took on a new significance. Against an enemy entrenched underground and committed to fight to the death, fire offered something no other weapon could: the ability to deny space completely. Flames did not need precision. They needed access. By 1944, the U.S. Marine Corps began integrating flamethrowers directly into assault units, not as rare support tools, but as essential instruments of bunker warfare. Two-man teams trained to advance under fire, protect the operator, and deliver bursts of burning fuel into confined spaces. It was dangerous work. Flamethrower operators were immediately identifiable. The tanks on their backs made them targets. Japanese snipers were instructed to kill them first. Mortar crews adjusted fire to eliminate them. The weapon's effective range was limited, forcing its user into the most lethal zone of the battlefield. But when it worked decisively. Entire bunker systems could be neutralized in minutes rather than hours. Defenders who had survived days of bombardment faced a weapon that turned their strongest defense, the underground, into a trap. By the time American planners looked toward Iwo Jima, they understood this reality fully. The island was small, volcanic, and honeycombed with tunnels. It sat halfway between the Marianas and Japan, making it vital for air operations. And it was defended by a commander who intended to make every yard cost lives. General Tadamichi Koribayashi had transformed Iwo Jima into one vast, interconnected fortress. Breaking it would require men willing to walk directly into fire, carrying fire with them. And that reality brings us closer to the Marine, the weapon, and the moment when the system finally broke. By the time U.S. Marines set foot on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, the cause had already been reshaped by 3 years of relentless combat. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Cape Gloucester, Saipan, and Peleliu had burned away any illusions about how the Pacific War would be fought. Victory would not come from sweeping maneuvers or rapid collapse. It would come one bunker, one cave, one ridgeline at a time. The Marine Corps adapted accordingly. Assault units were reorganized around specialized roles. Riflemen provided base fire. Automatic riflemen suppressed openings. Engineers moved forward with explosives. And alongside them came a new, feared presence, the flamethrower team. The standard weapon by late 1944 was the M222. It was a two-cylinder backpack system carrying thickened fuel and compressed nitrogen. Fully loaded, it weighed close to 70 pounds. Its effective range was roughly 20 to 40 yards, depending on pressure and wind. Each burst lasted only seconds, and total firing time rarely exceeded 10 to 12 seconds before the tanks were empty. This was not a weapon for prolonged fighting. It was a weapon for moments. The team consisted of 2 Marines. The operator carried the tanks and controlled the nozzle. The assistant stayed close, armed with a rifle or submachine gun, watching the operator's back, scanning for snipers, and guiding movement. Sometimes a 3rd Marine joined them, carrying extra fuel or explosives. Their survival depended on coordination, trust, and timing. Training emphasized speed and aggression. Once committed, hesitation increased the risk. The operator had to close the distance, expose himself, and deliver fire directly into bunker apertures or cave mouths. Flames were directed not just at the opening, but inside, bouncing off walls, rolling along ceilings, consuming oxygen. Japanese defenders understood what this meant. Flamethrower teams became priority targets. After-action reports repeatedly note that operators drew immediate fire the moment they were spotted. Mortars were walked onto them. Machine guns shifted to track them. Casualty rates among flamethrower operators were some of the highest of any infantry specialty, yet commanders continued to deploy them. The reason was simple. Nothing else worked as reliably. On Iwo Jima, General Koribayashi had forbidden banzai charges. He ordered his men to fight from prepared positions, inflict maximum casualties, and delay the Americans as long as possible. His defenses were layered, concealed, and interconnected. More than 1,500 caves and bunkers honeycombed the island. Many were invisible until they fired. Early assaults stalled almost immediately. Marines advanced through black sand under artillery and naval cover, only to be cut down by fire erupting from the slopes of Mount Suribachi and the northern plateau. Tanks bogged down. Infantry hugged the ground. Gains were measured in yards. It was in this environment that flamethrower teams became indispensable. Their use was not random. Platoon leaders identified stubborn positions holding up advances. Riflemen and machine gunners suppressed firing slits. Engineers prepared to follow. Then the flamethrower team moved forward, often crawling, sometimes sprinting, always exposed. When the flame hit, the effect was immediate. Defenders inside bunkers faced intense heat, toxic smoke, and oxygen deprivation. Even if the fire did not kill instantly, it made the position untenable. Survivors fled deeper into tunnels, where follow-up charges or secondary bursts waited. Entire defensive nodes could be neutralized in minutes. The psychological impact extended beyond the bunker itself. Nearby Japanese troops knew what the flames meant. American units saw progress where there had been none. Momentum shifted locally, then outward. This was not glorified combat. Marine diaries and reports described the work in blunt terms. The smell, the screams, the silence afterward. Flamethrower operators carried the burden of knowing exactly what their weapon did. By the third day on Iwo Jima, assault units began pairing flamethrower teams closely with infantry pushes. In some sectors, progress depended almost entirely on them. When a particularly dense cluster of bunkers blocked an advance, the solution was not more bombardment, it was fired at close range, and in one such sector, under constant enemy observation, a single flamethrower team would move from bunker to bunker with relentless speed until 16 positions fell silent in just 30 minutes. The conditions were set, the weapon was in place. All that remained was the moment of execution. The Marine carrying the flamethrower was not chosen for heroism. He was chosen because someone had to do it. Flamethrower operators were often volunteers at first, but replacements were frequently assigned as casualties mounted. There was no glamour attached to the role. The men knew the statistics. They knew the tanks on their backs made them visible from hundreds of yards away. They knew that a single bullet could rupture a fuel cylinder or ignite the hose. Yet they moved forward anyway. On Iwo Jima, the physical strain was relentless. The black sand drained energy with every step. The heat reflected off volcanic rock. The flamethrower's weight pulled the operator backward, forcing him to lean forward unnaturally. Straining muscles already exhausted by days of combat, the assistant stayed close, too close for comfort. If the operator fell, the assistant had to drag him clear or take the weapon himself. They communicated with hand signals and brief shouts, often drowned out by explosions. Trust was absolute. There was no time to argue. Emotionally, the burden was heavier still. Flamethrower operators saw the effects of their weapon immediately. Unlike artillery or naval gunfire, there was no distance, no abstraction. The enemy was only yards away, hidden behind rock and concrete, but undeniably present. After-action reports describe operators shaking after engagements. Hands burned from backflash, uniforms scorched. Many were rotated out, not because they were wounded, but because they could no longer function under the strain. Yet when an advance stalled, when rifle fire could not silence a bunker, eyes turned to them. And they went. The Marine at this moment did not know how many bunkers lay ahead. He only knew that the first one had to be cleared, then the next, and the next. Each step forward narrowed his world to a single opening in the earth. The M2 flamethrower was a blunt instrument. It had no sights, no precision controls. The operator aimed by feel, by instinct, by the shape of the terrain. Wind could deflect the stream. Pressure could drop unexpectedly. A clogged nozzle could render it useless. Maintenance was constant. Fuel mixtures had to be correct, valves checked, hoses inspected for cracks. In combat, there was rarely time for perfect preparation. When fired, the weapon expelled a thick stream of burning fuel, ignited at the nozzle. The flame adhered to surfaces, flowed into corners, and lingered. In confined spaces, heat built rapidly. Temperatures inside bunkers could rise to lethal levels in seconds. The effective burst was short. Operators were trained to fire in controlled bursts, conserving fuel, maximizing effect. Empty tanks meant withdrawal under fire to reload, a dangerous process that often had to be done in exposed positions. Despite its limitations, the weapon achieved something no other could. It forced the enemy out or killed him where he stood. Japanese defenses were designed to withstand shelling. They were not designed to survive fire drawn deep into enclosed spaces. Even thick concrete could not protect against oxygen deprivation and heat in the hands of a trained Marine. The flamethrower became a key that unlocked the underground war. The bunkers that fell in those 30 minutes were not isolated targets. They were part of a system. Each one covered approaches to the others. Fields of fire overlapped. If infantry tried to flank one position, another opened up. This was deliberate. Kurabayashi's design forced attackers into kill zones repeatedly. The solution required speed and sequencing. Riflemen suppressed visible openings. Grenades were thrown to distract defenders. Then the flamethrower team advanced while enemy attention was divided. Once a bunker was neutralized, The team moved immediately to the next before defenders could reoccupy or adjust fire. Timing mattered more than caution. 16 bunkers in 30 minutes was not a single act of violence. It was a chain reaction. Each cleared position removed fire that protected the next. Momentum built. Resistance collapsed locally. What made this moment exceptional was not just the number of bunkers, but the uninterrupted pace. There was no pause to regroup, no time for the enemy to adapt. The system failed all at once, and as the smoke drifted and the firing stopped, the battlefield entered a brief, unsettling quiet one that would force both sides to reckon with what had just occurred. That reckoning opens new perspectives. The Japanese soldiers inside those bunkers were not untrained or unprepared. Many were veterans of China, Guadalcanal, or earlier island battles. They had been told from the beginning that Iwo Jima was a one-way assignment. There would be no evacuation, no relief, no surrender. General Kuribayashi had been explicit. Every man was to kill as many Americans as possible before dying. Wasteful attacks were forbidden. Survival had value only if it allowed more resistance later. Inside the bunkers, conditions were already harsh. Ventilation was limited. Water was rationed. Bodies accumulated. Noise never stopped. The ground shook constantly from bombardment above. Sleep came in minutes, not hours. When flamethrowers appeared, they represented something entirely different from artillery or grenades. There was no warning whistle, no distant explosion. Fire arrived suddenly, filling space, consuming air, turning the bunker itself into a weapon against its occupants. Some defenders tried to flee through tunnels. Others attempted to return fire blindly through firing slits. Many had no chance to react at all. Japanese post-war accounts and captured documents describe flamethrowers as one of the most feared American weapons, not because of cruelty, but because they removed all options. The bunker was no longer protected. It was confinement. This fear spread quickly. Word traveled through tunnels. Units learned that certain sectors had fallen in minutes. Morale, already strained, fractured further. The defensive system depended on mutual support. Once that support vanished, isolation followed. American officers did not deploy flamethrower teams lightly. They understood the risks. Platoon and company commanders had seen operators cut down almost immediately upon exposure. They also understood the alternative. Without flamethrowers, advances stalled. Casualties mounted anyway. Men lay pinned down for hours under fire from positions that could not be reached by rifles alone. The cost of delay was measured in lives, just as surely as the cost of assault. Orders to use flamethrowers were born of calculation, not impulse. Reports from Iwo Jima repeatedly note that once flamethrower teams were committed, objectives were taken faster and with fewer overall casualties, despite the danger to the operators themselves. Commanders faced an ethical arithmetic shaped by terrain and enemy doctrine. Speed mattered. Every hour gained reduced exposure to artillery and mortar fire. Every bunker destroyed shortened the battle. Incrementally, the Marine advancing with the flamethrower was executing a decision made far above him, but the weight of that decision rested on his shoulders alone. Flamethrower occupy a unique place in the memory of war. They are often singled out as especially horrific. That perception is not inaccurate, but it is incomplete. The Pacific War was already brutal before fire entered the equation. Starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment defined daily existence on both sides. The Japanese refusal to surrender ensured that most battles ended only when one side was dead. In that environment, flamethrowers became a tool of finality. Marine accounts do not celebrate their use. They describe it as necessary, effective, and deeply unsettling. Many operators requested reassignment after surviving their first engagements. Others carried the memory for decades. The moral weight did not disappear when the flames went out. It lingered in the silence afterward, in the knowledge that entire positions had been erased in minutes. Yet for the men pinned down by bunker fire, 4 units unable to move forward, the destruction of those bunkers meant survival. This tension between necessity and horror defined much of the fighting on Iwo Jima, and it reached its most intense expression in the half-hour when resistance collapsed faster than anyone expected. That half-hour is where the battle turns. The assault begins without ceremony. There is no signal flare, no shouted command, only a brief lull in incoming fire, just long enough for movement to start. The flamethrower team advances. Across broken ground, scarred by shell craters and scattered debris, riflemen rise just enough to fire, pinning down bunker apertures ahead. Machine guns chatter, deliberate and controlled, aimed not to kill but to keep heads down. The first bunker sits low against a ridge, its firing slit nearly invisible beneath ash and rock. It has held up the advance for hours. Men have already died trying to silence it. The operator closes to within 20 yards. A short burst, flame arcs forward, strikes the opening, and disappears inside. The effect is immediate. Smoke erupts from cracks in the rock. Firing stops. The team does not wait to confirm. They move. The second bunker is higher, connected by a shallow trench. Grenades are thrown, first sharp explosions that force defenders deeper inside. The flamethrower follows, fire pouring down into the opening, lingering, spreading. Again, silence. There is no pause to count, no time to breathe. The assistant taps the operator's shoulder and points. Another opening, then another dot. Japanese fire intensifies as the pattern becomes clear. Mortar rounds land nearby, throwing sand and rock into the air. A machine gun opens up from the flank, forcing the team to go prone. The tanks on the operator's back make him a target, even when he lies still. Riflemen adjust. Fire shifts. The team moves again by the fifth bunker. The operator's uniform is scorched. The metal of the nozzle is too hot to touch without gloves. Fuel is running low. Each burst is shorter now, more precise. The sixth bunker is different. It has multiple chambers. Fire goes in once, then again, then a third time, deeper. The heat builds. Smoke pours out of every opening. The advance continues. This is not chaos. It is methodical violence executed under pressure. Suppression, advance, fire, move. Each destroyed bunker collapses the enemy's defensive web. Fields of fire vanish. Gaps open. Japanese defenders in adjacent positions are forced to choose between holding isolated ground or withdrawing. Through tunnels now filled with smoke, some attempt to counterattack. A rifleman appears briefly at an opening, firing wildly. He is cut down. Others never emerge. By the 10th bunker, the ground behind the team is littered with spent casings and burned debris. The Marines following can stand upright now. The enemy's grip is weakening. Time compresses. Minutes blur together as bunker after bunker falls silent. There is no dramatic explosion, no visible surrender, just the abrupt end of resistance in places that had been deadly moments before. The 11th, the 12th, the 13th. Fuel is nearly gone. The operator knows it. So does his assistant. There are still targets ahead. They keep moving. What happens next will decide whether this push stalls or whether an entire sector of the battlefield collapses at once. The 14th bunker sits deeper into the ridge, partially hidden by collapsed earth. It has not fired yet. That makes it more dangerous, not less. The flamethrower team approaches cautiously this time. Riflemen shift forward with them, scanning for movement. The operator adjusts the nozzle, aware that only seconds of fuel remain. A sudden burst of rifle fire erupts from a concealed slit to the right. The assistant reacts instantly, firing back, forcing the shooter down. The delay costs time. Mortar rounds begin to fall closer now. Walking in, the operator steps forward anyway. A final controlled burst is directed into the opening. Fire vanishes inside. Smoke follows, thick and black, rolling out across the ground. There is a brief sound, muffled, indistinct, then nothing. The 15th bunker is close, too close to ignore. There is no time to reload, no cover suitable for withdrawal. The operator uses what remains, angling the flame carefully, sweeping the opening and holding it just long enough to ensure the fire carries inside. Silence again. The 16th bunker is still different. It partially collapsed, its entrance reduced to a narrow gap. Grenades are useless here. The flamethrower's reach is barely enough. The operator drops to one knee, leans forward, and fires the last of the fuel into the gap. The flame splashes against rock and disappears. Smoke seeps out slowly, then stops. The weapon is empty. 30 minutes have passed since the first bunker fell silent. Around them, the battlefield has changed. Where interlocking fire once pinned entire platoons, there is now a stretch of ground that can be crossed without crawling. Marines begin moving forward in groups, occupying cleared positions, setting up defenses. Japanese fire from this sector has ceased almost entirely. Surviving defenders withdraw deeper into the tunnel network, abandoning positions that are no longer tenable. The defensive system in this area has collapsed not from bombardment, but from direct assault. The flamethrower team withdraws to the rear, escorted, exposed, exhausted. The operator's hands shake as he removes the tanks. His uniform is burned in places. His face is streaked with soot and sweat. There is no celebration. Officers mark the advance on maps. Engineers move in to seal tunnels. Medics attend to the wounded. The battle continues elsewhere, just as fierce as before. But in this narrow sector of Iwo Jima, the impossible has already happened. 16 fortified positions designed to resist. Days of attack have been neutralized in half an hour. The turning point is local, not global, yet its implications are immediate. The Marines now understand that even the deepest defenses can be broken quickly. The cost is accepted. That understanding will shape the rest of the fight, and its consequences will ripple long after the flames have gone out. When the firing stopped in that sector, the silence felt unnatural. Marines who had spent days pinned to the ground stood up slowly, half expecting machine gun fire to resume. It did not. The bunkers ahead were dark, scorched, and lifeless. Smoke drifted lazily from cracks in the rock, marking where resistance had been moments earlier. The immediate tactical impact was clear. A stalled advance resumed. Ground that had cost lives to approach was taken without further loss. Units moved laterally, exploiting the gap, pressing against adjacent Japanese positions now exposed on their flanks. Command reports noted the change almost clinically. Enemy strongpoints neutralized, resistance diminished, sector secured. Behind those words lay altered momentum. Japanese defenders nearby attempted to compensate, shifting fire from other positions, but the defensive web had been severed. Without mutual support, isolated bunkers were vulnerable. Engineers and infantry moved in, sealing tunnel entrances, collapsing caves with explosives, preventing reoccupation. Casualty figures reflected the brutal efficiency of the assault. Marine losses in the push were lower than in earlier attempts to cross the same ground. The cost had been concentrated on the flamethrower team itself. It's dispersed, targeted, exhausted, but their survival allowed the advance to continue. Japanese casualties in the destroyed bunkers were total. There were no prisoners from those positions. This was consistent with the nature of the fighting on Iwo Jima. Kuribayashi's orders, reinforced by isolation and indoctrination, left little room for surrender. Flamethrowers accelerated a process that was already heading toward annihilation. Word of the breakthrough spread quickly through Marine units, not as legend, but as proof that even the most stubborn defenses could be reduced rapidly under the right conditions. Flamethrower teams were requested more frequently. Their integration into assaults became more systematic. This did not end the battle. Iwo Jima would still take more than a month to secure. Casualties would continue to mount. Thousands of Japanese defenders would fight on from hidden positions long after organized resistance collapsed. But psychologically, something shifted. The island no longer seemed invulnerable. Japanese communications intercepted later in the battle reveal increasing concern over flamethrower use. Defensive plans accounted for it where possible, attempting to create deeper chambers or secondary exits. Yet the fundamental problem remained. Fire negated concealment. For the Marines involved, the aftermath was quieter and more personal. Flamethrower operators were often pulled from the line shortly after such actions, either reassigned or rotated back. Some were treated for burns or smoke inhalation. Others were simply exhausted beyond immediate usefulness. They did not speak much about what they had done. There was no ceremony on the battlefield, no pause for recognition. The war pressed forward relentlessly, demanding the same actions again in different places. Yet, the ground gained in those 30 minutes held. And holding it meant fewer lives lost in the hours that followed. That fact, uncomfortable but undeniable, defined how the moment was understood by those who commanded the battle. The broader consequences, however, extended beyond that single stretch of volcanic sand. As the battle for Iwo Jima ground on, the lessons from that rapid bunker-clearing assault were absorbed into Marine Corps practice almost immediately. Flamethrower teams were no longer treated as emergency measures. They became integral to planned advances, especially in terrain where caves and reinforced positions dominated. By the end of the battle, Marines had used flamethrowers, both man-portable and tank-mounted, to neutralize hundreds of defensive positions. The island was declared secured on March 26, 1945, though isolated Japanese soldiers continued to emerge from hiding for years afterward. Of the more than 21,000 Japanese defenders, fewer than 1,100 were captured alive. American casualties were staggering. Nearly 7,000 Marines and sailors were killed. More than 19,000 were wounded. Iwo Jima became one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. Within those numbers, flamethrower operators represented a small fraction of the force but suffered disproportionately high casualty rates. Many did not survive long enough to be officially recorded for individual acts. Their work was often anonymous, noted only in unit reports and after-action summaries. The weapon itself left a complicated legacy. In the immediate post-war period, flamethrowers were studied carefully. Their effectiveness against fortified positions was undeniable, yet their logistical burden, vulnerability, and psychological toll made them controversial. By the Korean War, they were still used, but increasingly replaced by more flexible systems, napalm rockets, and eventually thermobaric munitions. By the late 20th century, man-portable flamethrowers disappeared from U.S. service entirely, for the men who carried them. The end of the war did not erase what they had seen. Many rarely spoke of it. Others described vivid memories that lasted decades: the heat, the smell, the sudden silence when a bunker fell quiet. These were not stories told to glorify. They were recollections offered carefully, often reluctantly. When asked by historians or family members seeking understanding, Iwo Jima itself became a symbol. The flag raising on Mount Suribachi captured one moment of the battle. The underground water caves, bunkers, and fire remained largely unseen. Yet it defined the island just as completely. The assault that destroyed 6 dim bunkers in 30 minutes did not change the outcome of the war on its own, but it illustrated a truth that commanders and soldiers alike came to accept. Modern warfare had reached a point where defense alone could not guarantee survival. Technology, when combined with human endurance and willingness, could breach even the deepest preparations. The cost of that truth was measured not only in casualties, but in memories carried home, and those memories would shape how the war was remembered and how future wars would be fought. All that remains now is to step back, away from the smoke and fire, and consider what this moment meant in the long arc of history. The half hour in which 16 bunkers fell on Iwo Jima does not stand out on most maps. There is no single marker, no preserved trench line drawing the eye, yet it represents something essential about the way the Second World War was fought in its final years. This was a war where preparation met inevitability, where defenses built with intelligence and discipline were still vulnerable to a force willing to close the distance. The flamethrower did not win the battle by itself, but it revealed the limits of fortification in an age of industrial warfare. For the Marine who carried that weapon, the moment was not symbolic. It was immediate and personal. Survival depended on speed, trust, and the willingness to advance into danger others could not face. His actions were not extraordinary in intent. They were extraordinary in consequence. For the Japanese defenders, the bunkers represented resolve, made physical. They fought from positions designed to deny the enemy progress, believing that endurance itself was victory. Fire turned that belief inward, transforming protection into confinement. History often remembers war through grand strategy and decisive outcomes, but battles are decided in smaller spaces, yards of ground, seconds of action, choices made under unbearable pressure. On Iwo Jima, the war beneath the surface defined the fight. As much as any fleet or bomber. The legacy of that moment is not found in celebration. It lies in understanding the cost of innovation, the weight placed on individuals by necessity, and the truth that even the most formidable defenses cannot fully shield humanity from the violence it creates. When the smoke cleared, the island remained scarred. The men who fought there carried those scars home, and in that silence after the flames, history took note not of a weapon alone, but of what it demanded from those who bore it.